That's great. Thanks, Julian. That was great, and I love that you kicked off by saying like nobody has the answer, because this really is a journey that we're going to be on for some time to come. So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Neil from Dropbox. So at Dropbox, we're going virtual first, which means for us, remote work will be the primary experience for all of our employees versus being at a desk in an office. But we do still recognize the importance of bringing people together. So we're actually going to recreate our offices as collaboration studios, with teams coming together in person for collaboration, culture building, or to work on a specific challenge, once it's safe to do so, of course. So this toolkit I'm going to speak to you today is a work in progress based on our experiences so far, but we're going to continue to practice, test, and add more content as we learn over the coming months. I'll speak through some of the key elements of the Virtual First Toolkit today, but we've published this externally, so you can find it by searching for Dropbox Virtual First Toolkit if you want to do a much deeper dive into all the topics that I will discuss today. So next slide, please. So one of the biggest challenges with virtual first or remote work isn't technology, but rather how teams use it. With people decentralized across time zones and locations, teams really need to think everything around their schedules to their social contracts. And it also means challenging some of our basic assumptions about how great work gets done. So we're all used to the model of a regular working week where teams sit at their desk for 40 hours a week as a measurement of productivity. But instead of measuring how much stuff your team does, so for example, 15 projects, or how present they are in the office, we really need to shift to thinking about measuring the impact of the work that they have and what value that brings to the business. Moving away from lots of meetings to have teams think async by default is another really great opportunity with Virtual First. Virtual First work provides a chance to develop much better habits for your teams. And one of those is replacing quick syncs with asynchronous by default. So going forward, trying to have your team solve problems over email, cloud docs, or chat before reflexively scheduling a meeting. So these kind of behavioral shifts take time, as it's how we've been programmed to work for decades. But as we learn to work virtually, it's a big change, and like we're bound to mess up every now and again. So it's really important to give yourself and your teammates permission to make mistakes so you can learn from them, iterate, and continue to improve. Next slide, please. So the WHO has called workplace stress the health epidemic of the 21st century. An always-on work culture where technology pings us all day and night plays a massive role in this. With everybody working more flexibly across time zones, there's a real temptation to check in at work all hours of the night. I think we've all experienced it. And teams need to be really thoughtful about how we manage our time. So something we've implemented at Dropbox is the concept of core collaboration hours, where we've set 4-hour collaboration blocks for each region, and we encourage our employees to design their own work schedules beyond that. So collaboration hours doesn't mean just scheduling like 4 hours of Zoom calls, in a row. They just mean being available for synchronous work, responding to teammates, discussing ideas, and collaborating on things at the same time. The concept of a non-linear workday is something I personally love. So outside of core collaboration hours, Dropboxers are encouraged to go non-linear. So this can include moving away from the traditional 8-hour work block to design your work week to suit yourself. So I can break up my working hours across the day, so I can have breakfast with my kids in the morning, I can have some EMEA-based meetings in the morning time, I can take a couple of hours out during the day to collect the kids from school or play some music, and then reconnect in the afternoon or the evening to collaborate with some colleagues in the US. So this freedom to design my own work week allows me to focus my time on the work where I can have the most impact, but also make sure that I continue to have a balance in my personal life. So next slide, please. So sticking with healthy habits can be challenging at the best of times, let alone during a global pandemic and the all new working reality that we're dealing with. Intentionally organizing your workspace and investing in some basic equipment can keep life and work feeling separate, even when they're blended. So admittedly, I do have quite a nice setup here, but it's great for me to be able to step away and pick up a guitar when I'm stressed out to get some headspace, and it's really important that your teams are able to do that as well. Encouraging and promoting a culture where wellness is seen as a priority is really critical in this new work model we find ourselves in. So there's been a lot of talk recently about companies running yoga sessions at lunchtime, but those kind of initiatives are really pointless if there isn't a real culture of wellness where employees feel empowered to either avail of those kind of initiatives or find their own ways to de-stress. So recharging is more critical than ever to prevent teams from burning out. particularly when the lines between work and personal life are so fuzzy. So something that we've implemented at Dropbox that I love is Unplug Pto. So with this, when Dropboxers are booking their time off, they select Unplug Pto in the holiday booking tool, and it automatically disables access to their work tools on their mobile devices. So we implemented this as feedback we heard from Dropboxers was that mobile was the biggest source of putting them back into work mode while they were off. I think we all know it can be so tempting to just click on an email or Slack icon when you're on holidays or late in the evening. And it really helps Dropboxers to disconnect and recharge. Next slide, please. So supporting your team. You don't have to be an executive to meaningfully impact your team's well-being and productivity. So everybody from new employees to senior executives to individual contributors can help their teams to thrive in a virtual first context. And ultimately, everybody at the company is responsible for building and contributing to the culture that they want to be a part of. At Dropbox, we're really committed to supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion across all of our organization. And another great thing about Virtual First is it's opened up so many more locations for us to hire great talent from. Going Virtual First also means being even more intentional about how teams develop and support each other, and ensuring that tasks and projects are assigned fairly, performance reviews are equitable, and ensuring meetings are inclusive so all voices can be heard, and those behaviors and practices have to be modeled all throughout the organization. The principles of great management rarely change, but when we're working virtually, we notice their absence even more acutely. So if you find yourself in a leadership position, it's really important, some very simple tips, really get to know your team, model psychological safety, create an atmosphere of trust across the organization, become a good coach, help your teams to grow, recognize and rewarding your team. It can be very easy to overlook achievements when distributed, which can be incredibly demotivating for a team and very hard to spot. And finally, just be responsive and engaged with your team. It signals that you care and really helps your own teams to keep engaged in turn. Next slide, please. So finally, effective communication with distributed teams is crucial, especially taking time zones and async workflows into consideration. So Virtual First means going async by default and solving problems with collaboration tools like Dropbox Paper or over email or Slack before we flexibly schedule a meeting. But when most of our interactions are mediated by screen and text, it can be very easy to misinterpret each other. So we really have to go out of our way to be clear, warm, and inclusive in how we communicate. I'm sure we've all been on the receiving end of a confusing document, a too long email, or a terror Slack message. At best, these can lead to confusion. Worst case, it makes you wonder, why is Carol and the account so mad at me? In a virtual first world, writing to be understood, not just heard, is more important than ever. A simple question like, why did you make that decision? Can come across as perfectly benign in person, but it can feel very threatening over Slack or email, where we can't read facial expressions or vocal tone. Avoid misunderstandings by using emotionally intelligent language. Tackling your tools. So, we all have loads of apps at our disposal, and it's great to have choices, but at times, tool proliferation can lead to death by 1,000 Slack messages or Gchat or emails. To do our best work virtually, teams will need to establish new norms around which tool to use for which type of work. For example, at Dropbox, we use Slack for quick real-time and async conversations, Dropbox Paper for collaborating on documents, and Zoom when we really need to have a meeting. And speaking of meetings, while they're one of the main ways that we catch up with teammates and we can keep moving projects forward, they're also one of the worst ways that we waste time and money. So it's really important to do meetings right when we're async by default. So we have guidelines in our toolkit to make Dropboxers really consider what merits calling a meeting. And we actually actively encourage Dropboxers to decline unnecessary meetings where possible. When Dropboxers do need to schedule a meeting, we again have guidance around how they can make them effective, from ensuring there's a clear agenda, considering time zones, and sending out pre-reads in advance. All of these are very simple tips, but all with the intention of shifting people's mindsets to ensure we can maximize time for our teams to actually get work done. So thanks for listening. I hope you found some of these tips from the toolkit interesting. If you'd like to read more, just search for Dropbox Virtual First Toolkit. You can check it out in more detail. And with that, I'll pass you over to Laura.